One group advocating for the UK to remain in the European Union is Business for New Europe. Its campaign manager is Lucy Thomas, and she joins us now from London. Thanks so much for your time tonight. As we've just heard in the Queen's speech, the Cameron government says it plans to pass a law paving the way for a referendum on Britain's membership in the EU. Why are you against this proposal?
We're not against the fact that there should be a referendum. I think the business community is slightly unnerved by the possible uncertainty that will ensue. If you remember, we had the Scottish referendum at the end of last year, and around £17 billion of investment was frozen across the whole of the UK. So I think from a business perspective, there is that uncertainty as soon as you ask such a huge question about the future of the country. So I think those in the business community would want it to happen as soon as possible.
Yes, you obviously advocate for Britain to remain in the EU because you're saying that it might damage the economy there as well as business relations with the rest of Europe. Can you just expand on that further? Why do you think it's so important for the UK to remain in the Union for business purposes?
Yes, well, I mean, the EU is the world's largest market with 500 million consumers, and it's right on our doorstep. So it allows easy access for goods and services right across Europe, as well as free trade deals with the rest of the world. So I think most people in the business community don't really understand why you would want to remove all of those benefits just to have to then renegotiate your way back into it all.
Yes, earlier this month, David Cameron and his Conservative Party won the right to govern in its own right, promising this EU referendum. And it was responding really to a lot of pressure within the community, saying that there's a lot of social effects in terms of the influx of people from the Union into Britain. Do you believe that's the case? Has there been this added strain on Britain's health and education systems as a result of those from outside of Britain coming into the country?
No, I wouldn't agree with that at all, because actually EU migrants who come here come to work, and proportionally they are far more likely to be employed and young and healthy than British sort of native Britain. So actually they're far better for the economy as far as that's concerned. I think it's been a very successful tactic of those who want to leave the EU to link our position in Europe to migration and people's fears about globalisation and the world at large, and to put the blame on EU migrants for all ills, basically. So I think we have a job to do to explain the reality of those things. And where they absolutely have a point is that while we're in the EU, there is freedom of movement, so we do have to accept EU migrants coming from here, but we also have to remind people there are roughly the same number of British people living in the rest of Europe, around 2 million, as there are EU migrants living here. And actually, do we want all of those retired people from the Spanish coast to come back to Britain if we leave and to clog up our NHS?
It is early days yet, with the Queen only just announcing the government's plans for the vote. But how does the business community in the UK plan to counter the yes vote, that is the yes to exiting the EU vote?
Well, I think for a start, it's good you mentioned yes there. Actually, it's really positive for us that we have yes for our side of the discussion. So it's about yes to Britain's future and our place in the world and things like that. So I think we have to have a big, broad-based campaign, which is absolutely about the economic arguments and the business perspective, but also much wider than that, and the consumer benefits and the environment and our security and sort of strength in the world. Because actually, in the 40-odd years that we've been a member, there haven't really been those discussions. There's been a lot of criticism and opposition to things coming from Brussels, and this perception that there are all these horrible rules coming from over there. But actually, nobody's really put the passionate, positive case for why we're better off in, and that falls to us to do.
So do you believe there's been a lot of scaremongering and misinformation when it comes to the European Union?
Yes, and I think it's quite easy to do that because decisions are taken in Brussels, and so it's easy to portray it as this sort of elite bureaucratic system. But actually, I think people don't realise that our ministers actually go there and take part in that decision making. So every time a rule is decided, the Council of Ministers, which a British minister will always be present at, will have decided that. And we also have members of the European Parliament, 70-odd British MEPs. So it's just sort of, I think, explaining that to people, and yes, allowing them to have that discussion, and whether it's right that we do collective decision making with other European countries and actually being part of a club. That's what it involves, with all the huge benefits that come with that.
You say that Britain's business community is quite baffled as to why you would want to leave the European Union, but are you confident that your message can trickle down to those who are outside of the business community so they would vote your way?
Yes, I think so, and I think it has to be done via lots of different routes. So not only businesses themselves talking about it, but actually employees of lots of those businesses. So if you look at, for example, the car sector, around 700,000 people in the UK are employed in the automotive sector, and 50% of cars and other vehicles made here go to the rest of the EU. So if we were to leave, there could be tariffs and lots of other barriers imposed on those, and then it's no longer viable or competitive for car manufacturers to remain in the UK. So actually those businesses explaining that they may not be in a position to stay in the UK, I think that is a logical thing for people to not want to gamble with Britain's future.
OK, Lucy Thomas, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you again for your insights tonight.